Hi, Gene Monterastelli here, the editor of tappingqanda.com. The video that you are about to watch is a conversation that was a part of this year's 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping is a fundraiser for the amazing work that is done by the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network has brought tapping to migrants, refugees, prisoners, and the underprivileged in over 30 countries all over the world. As you watch this video, if you learned something, if you were touched by it, if you were inspired by it, the easiest way to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network. To do that, all you need to do is go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support. And as you look in the description and the first comment down below, you will see a direct link to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Next up in this cavalcade of stars is my friend Rick Wilkes. Rick uses intuition and deep understanding of human nature to bring relief, clarity, and insight to those to explore wisdom that works and design a thriving life now. Please welcome to the 24-hour of tapping stage, my friend Rick Wilkes. So one of the things that just excited me as we were getting ready to have this particular conversation is I'm someone who loves thinking about all things, but including transformation through fundamentals. Like it's not that there is just like we're having this human experience and things come up and we respond to it, but the subconscious works in a certain way and humans work in a certain way and the way we see the world works in a certain way. And when we understand kind of like underlying fundamentals, for me at least, as a systematic person, it gives me a jumping off point. It gives me a way of evaluating. It gives me a way of just kind of engaging with transformation in a slightly more structured way, even
Yes.
though every piece of transformation is different. Every human is different. Like for me, at least having some guardrails makes it useful. For you, as you think of fundamentals and concepts, like how do you engage with that? How is that useful for you? And then we can kind of jump in and think about the ones that are most useful from your point of view.
Mhm. I remember when I was first exposed to tapping, um, I had already known that I needed to be in my body. So, like,
Mhm.
tapping these points, there's a fundamental concept of, are we a brain delivery system or are we a fully embodied person? So
Mm.
someone that understands that I have a head, but I also have intelligence in my heart and my gut, my groin, my toes, and there's information. So, like, fundamentally, the concept of, why would I tap on my body? Well, I want to feel more of me. I want to feel connected. That's a concept. So,
Mhm.
one of the things we're going to be exploring is, what are practical concepts for thriving? I believe that we're born with a lot of survival instincts, right? You
Mhm.
see that in babies. I'm blessed to have a 3.5-year-old in my life. And there are things that she just knew, right?
Right.
Built in framework, just like she has bones in her body. And I don't think she understands about that bones are living, that they provide structure, that they, how they articulate with one another on joints determines, like, what's your range of motion. Um, So a conceptual framework around thriving to me says, hey, what what do I we often talk about beliefs, but for me there's an idea of what concepts I'm running on, like the guardrails. So I'll give you an example. I believe that for survival, obligation can be really useful. You're
Mhm.
obligated in certain family dynamics. You're obligated in certain tribal dynamics. You're obligated, if you're a great hunter, to share with the tribe. And there's not only shaming and outcast and other things that are very primal, but it's useful for survival. Now, for thriving, I look at obligation like, oh, obligation feels really heavy. Feels uh, like it's ripe and ready for evolution. And so there's a concept called right distance, right depth, which says we are in dynamic relating with the things in our life.
Mhm.
Um, If you're cold, you get closer to the fire. If your relationship is growing a little cold, you might want to go closer and deeper in order to strengthen that. They're difficult people, and you may not want to be as deep and connected to people who are not a good fit for you. They may be in your blood family, they may be in your workplace, they may have roles in your life, but you adapt the concept. And to bring this to tapping is if you feel obligated and that your body gives you a reaction. It's like, I feel heavy, I feel rebellion, I feel resistance, I feel like I want to run, I feel frozen. Those are things that we address in tapping. It's like, I feel obligated to call my mother.
Yeah.
I feel obligated to call my mother and I don't want to, and I'm not. And it makes me feel, now notice I'm tapping as I just kind of go over obligation. This obligation is a part of the emotional framework that most humans come up with. But if you're freedom oriented, emotional freedom techniques, if you're freedom oriented, obligation is unlikely to feel really good for you.
And as you say that, there's two things that stir inside of my head. The first is a number of years ago, for whatever reason, I took Maslow's hierarchy of needs and I took it and I turned it 30 degrees and I laid it right over the top of the brain. And like that lower end stuff was back here where the higher end stuff was here. And that stuff where you're talking about survival lives in that place of the subconscious mind because it's in certain contexts and at certain point in history, it's essential. And if we're operating from that place, I loved how you're talking about survive to thrive inside of that. The other is you're talking about the heaviness in my own work. The phrase that I've been using a lot in my own life and with my clients is like, there's something that I'm desiring to do. And I just go, I'm not allowed to do this because. And I let the subconscious complete that sentence. And oftentimes it's these obligation things that show up inside of that cultural obligations, family, age, workplace, gender, religious upbringing, all of those things where at a certain point in history, not going against the grain equaled survival. And we now live at a spot like you're talking about where we get to encounter and think about thriving in freedom in a way that our ancestors 4,000 years ago didn't have the luxury to think about in the exact same way. And like we're getting a chance to evolve into what it means in a modern way to be human as we're engaging with all of this.
Right. And I view EFT as an emotional technology. And this framework, if we become aware, like that's a doorway, I'm not allowed to do this, or it's
Mm-hmm.
not safe to do this because what that will show are the things that are kind of in our survival framework.
Yeah.
And the upgrade, this I've always felt that tapping acknowledges where we are and is served best by giving it a direction, a
Mm-hmm.
direction that has some steel to it, structural, like, or at least bone to it. Our bones are living. I don't know why I was like in my 20s when
Right.
I learned that what? Bones are living? Well, of course they are, but
Right.
I didn't have that framework that my bone,
Right.
oh, and bones break, they're moving all the time, just like trees. If we have a framework that we can move our energy toward, like, even though I feel like I'm obligated to call my mother, what if I'm not?
Yeah.
And you're opening up a possibility. So where do you move it? Um, this framework of right distance, right depth, it's a concept. And it's been really useful to so many people. I'm glad to share it because the idea is you're moving it toward how how deep do I want to go with my mother? How close do I want to be with my mother right now? What feels right to me? I know there's a right distance and right depth. Now, I don't know exactly what that is, but right now I feel a little too what? a little too shallow, a little too deep, and it's dynamic. The cool thing about thriving frameworks is that they're living. They
Yeah.
respond to changes in our ecosystem and in our needs and in our heart. Um, they can be responsive rather than rigid. I believe that one of the markers of a conceptual framework like obligation is rigid, and if we're moving toward frameworks which are responsive, that would be a hallmark of that, as it can respond to where I am as a human and my development, what matters to me, things like that.
And what I love about that is, and this is something that I've just been exploring a lot more in just my own personal development, is this idea, right? The vocabulary using, right distance, right depth, is all about context.
Yeah,
And not only is like distance and depth ever changing, my context is changing. You know, I, a couple of days ago tweaked my back and was just in a lot of pain, so I could not
yeah,
focus. And so what that
right,
did was I recognized that there were certain relationships or certain people I just wasn't in the proper resource state to engage with in the way that was going to be useful. Just because when I'm in this sort of physical pain, I know that I'm shorter and I am less patient. And so
exactly.
I'm recognizing in this moment, not only is distance and depth like, it's not like 5 years ago our relationship was this and today our relationship is that. There's certainly that part of it, but it's also yesterday I felt this way, today I felt this way. This morning I felt this way, today I feel this, or this afternoon I feel this way, and giving ourselves permission because I just want the right answer. Like there's a part of me that just like tell me what to do so I can navigate the world in a useful, helpful way. And I know that creativity and depth and richness doesn't come from that, but at a certain point, like I follow directions really well, and just tell me tell me when to tap, tell me how to tap, tell me what. Like I'm okay with that. And what you're acknowledging inside of this is like that is really useful in a short-term way in very specific contexts. But
Yeah,
I love the word and it's the word that the word you've always used in your work, this idea of thrive.
right.
And like that is something that like we engage with in so many different ways, moment to moment. And I love the context that you're giving to that.
Right, and right distance, right depth, because it's dynamic, it reflects like what's my resource level. It also
Yeah.
reflects into the we spaces that we have. Like a we space is a concept for thriving. It says it's
Yeah.
something that there are more of us that are investing in tending to it. Um, and so if I have a relationship and she wakes up really grumpy, right distance, right depth, my primitive brain might go two things: run, or it might be going, reassure me, let me know that you
Right.
still care. That's where I would tap, like, okay, I'm this is a hard energy for me. What's right distance, right depth?
Hmm.
Um, I feel like giving some space, just a few feet, like, oh, ah, yeah. Now, in relationships, because I tap so much, I can imagine myself just like grounding myself with the tapping without actually moving,
Hmm.
sometimes. So just to let people know, you can practice the feeling of this. Like there's a concept of body guidance, and body guidance, I believe that as we tap, we're reminding our body that we want the fullness of us to guide us, to be able to let us detect, it's a hot day, I don't need to be close to the fire. Or the fire is throwing out sparks. If I just move a few feet back, the sparks are not going to likely hit me as if I
Hmm.
go and try to embrace someone who is actually radiating a bit of, hey, I need space. Stay away is sort of the primal. I need space is the thriving. I need space to kind of ground and tend to myself. Now someone can be grumpy, and the energy of body guidance is, hey, take a step closer, offer yourself. Same people. different moments, maybe
Yeah.
even 5 minutes apart. And so that's exciting to me, and that's how I use and because we use this technology, what we can do is, like, let's say you had a really an experience where you felt like you were either too close, too deep, too vulnerable, or not enough, and you're aware of it. Do you want to do just a little tapping with that?
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
Yeah. So
Everybody
um,
tap along with us as we do this.
even though that didn't feel good to me,
Even though that didn't feel good to me.
that's the truth.
And that's the truth.
I accept how I feel,
I accept how I feel.
and I'm open to understanding right distance, right depth.
And I'm open to understanding right distance, right depth.
Was I too close or too far?
Was I too close or too far?
What would have felt better to me?
What would have felt better to me?
Eyebrow. Was I holding back or revealing too much?
Was I holding back or revealing too much?
Side of the eye. I didn't get the response I wanted.
I didn't get the response I wanted.
Under the eye. I really needed reassurance.
I really needed reassurance.
Under the nose. They were not in a reassuring place.
They were not in a reassuring place.
Chin. And I'm open to applying this concept
And I'm open to applying this concept
for my thriving.
for my thriving.
Hold on. That did not feel good to me.
That did not feel good to me.
How do I want to evolve this in the future?
How do I want to evolve this in the future?
What was I picking up that I ignored?
What was I picking up that I ignored?
Now, I was using some judgmental words in there, like too close, too, like, but that's part of what we do with tapping is we acknowledge like what's alive in us, not our like right distance, right depth says there's not there there's a sensation of being like too close. There's like I it actually feels a little bit better to move a little bit more distant or even significantly more distant. Um, there's a there's kind of a vulnerability hangover we can get in our primitive brain when we reveal something true about ourselves to someone, and that I might like, even though that felt really uncomfortable. I appreciate going deeper and the opportunities that that brings. It felt right to go deeper, but it feels scary. Yes. And it felt right to go deeper. And now we'll see. And now we'll see. It felt good to go deeper. Now, notice I'm honoring that the primitive brain actually, every time we go deeper in intimacy, into closeness with someone, reveal a part of ourselves. The primitive brain goes, "Is that okay?" And right distance, right depth says for thriving, yes, I want some deep relationships. If I came from a place of guidance, then oh yeah, that's so good. I appreciate that about me. I want people I can go deeper with that are also safe. If you have a concept that you have to always reveal and be close, and that's what the measure of a bonded relationship is, that you don't um, you end up sometimes with people, a common term is oversharing. This concept
Mhm.
of right distance, right depth says, hey, did that sharing feel right to me? And was it met? Um, it could have been the right depth for me, but the other person was like, this is more than I can handle. Oh, that's
Yeah.
useful. Like, oh, I like that depth for me. And the other person wasn't in that place. Um, As people apply this as an antidote to obligation, whenever they notice obligation, they say, but I want to stand for right distance, right depth. Their emotional thriving improves. They can feel that it honors their desire for safety and respect and freedom while also letting them be in more dynamic balance. Um, and it's okay if you feel obligated to resist it. Like, yeah, even though I'm resisting doing this thing because I feel obligated, that's okay. But I want my clarity about what's right for me. Um, right distance, right depth matters. It feels natural. It feels thriving. It feels easeful in my body. So
And one
that's
of the
one of
things
them.
yeah, and before we go on to a couple of more, I want to underline something really specifically that you're doing in the way that you tap that I think is good and useful for all of us to hear is, so my website tapping Q&A, I get questions all the time. I encourage them. The single most common question I am asked are, what are the tapping phrases for insert issue? As if they're magic phrases. And the thing that I love about what you're doing is you are, while tapping, exploring and poking around the edges about what is possible. That there is very little declarative, and sometimes declarative stuff is useful when we're tapping, but it's kind of like, I'm experiencing this. I wonder what this is like. I wonder what serves me best. I wonder what doesn't serve me at all. And like for me, just dispositionally, anytime I can approach anything from a sense of curiosity, I immediately become less self-judgmental because I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen in this particular way. And just like, it is so beautiful in the way that you are approaching your own experience and tapping from a disposition of curiosity. And it's not that I have to have the path figured out, then I'm going to go and tap so I can move from where I was to where I want to be. What you're demonstrating here is we can discover that while we are tapping, and it is okay that the only thing I know is, something is a little bit off. Okay, I'm going to start asking questions and saying things out loud and stating what I know and stating what I don't know and stating what is possible. And so just like I think it's really easy, like if we were just tapping along with that, to miss that particular thing because the words you're using are so useful. But dispositionally, that fundamental as a curious discovering tapper, I think is something that all of us can find much more useful because I'm much more willing to sit down and tap where I don't have to have the answer about what I'm tapping on, but I'm tapping to do investigation. And what I notice inside of that is you're also like open to not having the answer right now. Like that's how wide the curiosity is inside of that. And so like I know it's not one of the concepts, but my gosh, as a disposition of as a tapper, I really want to underline that because I think that's so useful for us to hear.
Well, curiosity is a concept for thriving. And I think if we
Mhm.
look at the tapping process, you become aware, I feel obligated. Okay. I acknowledge it. Like I feel obligated. I feel
Yeah.
obligated. And I hate that. So
Yeah.
those are part of the declarative, where am I? We're aware of it, and by speaking to me, I think you're accepting it. Like, oh, I
Mhm.
hate that. I hate that I have to. I hate that I don't want to, and I'm going to. Um, the next layer of that is the freedom layer, where we're exploring so that the wonder and curiosity. I wonder, what if? Could it be possible that when you open that, now other parts of your brain are saying, "Oh, we're searching now. We're adapting. We're looking for choices." And then you can move to uh, a clarity and take inspired action. Inspired action is a concept. Inspired action says, you know, I'm free. I know I have choices. One of them could be just to be nope, I'm not going to do it. One of them can be, I'm going to pretend that it's okay. And I know that I'm pretending and it's a choice that I have. It's like, oh, I'm going to adapt this. I'm going to do something a little different. Um, I really actually want to call my mom. And even though I feel obligated, I don't know, I'm not actually. You start filling in the choices. So choice is part of tapping. And
Hmm.
Dr. Patricia Carrington had brought that in early in my tapping time. It's like, oh, yes,
Yeah.
it acceptance is a core part. It's like, this is where I am, and it's not, doesn't make me feel good, and I don't feel like a good person. I don't feel like I know what's going on. And then but the choice part of it is where tapping can, in that free form, like, yeah, what if I change my phone number? What if, like you come up
Yeah.
with things, and by tapping, we know that you're sending a signal in your body. To me, my felt sense is I'm saying, with these meridians and the energy and the physicality, I want my whole being to give input here. I want, if I've got wisdom in my gut, I want to hear it,
Yeah.
express it, put it on the table if I have that. Um, so the next concept that I'd like to touch on is one that, like, perfectionism is sort of a primitive brain thing.
Yeah.
Um, trauma can influence it, how we fit in the world. Like, oh, I'm a decisive person. I know what to do. If I have that as my identity, guess what? I'm going to be a perfectionist. Uh, Curiosity starts changing that, right? It's like, oh, I'm a curious person. Um, eh, Perfectionism is a concept that feels like, in my core, it was about staying safe, primally safe, fitting in,
Yeah.
being valued, my status in the classroom, my status in the family, my status in the world. Um, what if, now, if you're a reforming perfectionist, or perfectionism is a part of your uh, world, notice I've started tapping. It's not about what I'm saying, it's about what I'm feeling. Like, there's a primal, as soon as I touch on the primal, I need to be perfect or else. Yeah, even though I need to be perfect or else. And wonder, there's this concept of imperfectionism. Imperfectionism. What? That's not good. What if it is? I let's go to nature. Even the straightest species of trees that we plant are not actually geometrically perfectly straight. And most of the trees that we find beautiful, because they are living creatures, or living beings, or living spirits, or living plants, however you want to feel it in your body, guess what? They're twisted. They reach for the sun here. They get blocked by the sun there. So then the wind blows them, and they create these things. Um, so part of the tapping, the energy antidote here for me is, like, even though I could try to be a perfectionist, that's not really natural. It's not really what feels wise, savvy. So you take something that, even though I have to be perfect, I'm open to being a savvy imperfectionist, or an aspiring imperfectionist. And it's a concept I like, because some concepts, they they mess with our mind. And I believe that growth, the things that tapping has brought to me, is a capacity to with my mind in a way that directs my energy. And so uh, I don't consider I'm not a perfectionist in my core anymore, because I've practiced this energy of savvy imperfectionist. It feels natural to me. It feels freer to me. It feels safer to me. There's nothing like, if you want to be emotionally cruel to yourself, treat something as being, uh, as needing to be perfect. I don't know, anyway. The things that caused me the most distress were things that, like, oh, even though I feel like that has to be perfect, What if it doesn't? What if that's a silly no? Notice I also like the concept of savvy. There's a concept for thriving called savvy.
Mhm.
Savvy is different than smart. It's so there's savvy and silly. I kind of put them
Mhm.
like, oh, what? So I'll use like, even though being a perfectionist is really sort of silly, it's not the wisest. I I'm exploring imperfectionism. It's kind of interesting to me. I wonder where that'll lead me. It doesn't mean that we don't value other things. Imperfectionism articulates with creativity. Um, uh, it articulates with an awareness that everything can be improved. There's
And,
nothing and
yeah.
changed and modified and evolved.
And as you say that, like even as a person, like as a dyslexic person who hasn't spelled a word the same way 3 times in my entire life and very, very comfortable with not having things perfect, even for me, like the hairs in the back of my head stand up just a little bit around imperfection. And for me, like the word that I use, and again, it's about what is useful for us, is useful. And so for me, like the opposite of doing something perfect is how do I do something in a way that is useful? And for me, when I hear that, there's so many things in my life, everything in my life that is useful is not perfect, but I'm able to recognize how it engages in that particular way. And so it's not like, what's the perfect way to do it? What's the useful way to do it? And for me, again, the vocabulary that we use is the vocabulary that is the one that makes the most sense for us. For me, it does the exact same thing that you're talking about there. Is it takes the pressure off and it moves to not about how I do it and doing it in a super structured way, but what am I trying to create? What am I trying to co-create in this moment? And what are the things that I have access to that are useful in creating that particular thing? And so it does something similar, even though it's a different word because we all define words in different ways. But like that notion of like for what, by who, to what measure, like it, why am I doing this? I'm doing it for the outcome, not because of these standards that I'm carrying that are culturated inside of me as I'm navigating the world.
Yeah. And useful is one of the concepts that I I believe holds a tremendous amount of wisdom, just like good and sufficient.
Yeah.
Um, Outcome is not a concept that uh, like energetically works for me, and that's, I think, one of the
Yeah.
things is we talk about practical. For each of us, our energy system is oriented in a certain way. I needed something that felt like an antidote, that was had its own um, energetic structure. And so
Hmm.
even just being exposed and going deeper into, well, what do I mean by imperfectionism? It embraces a truth. Oh, okay, that anything and anyone in any situation could be improved. And our artistry is set free by being uninterested in striving for some delusion of perfection.
Hmm.
Now, when I use words like that, or I use silly, I it's a way of saying, yeah, that it's sort of a silly concept for me to try to be a perfectionist. It doesn't fit with the rest of me. I like being useful. I believe in good and sufficient work. It's good. It puts my artistry into it. The concept of artistry is different than artistry. A lot of people like, I'm not an artist. Okay, are you a artist? Is there something that you want to put your unique blend of yourself? Like, even though I'm not a performing artist and isn't that the only way to be an artist? Or even though I don't get paid for my art, even though I'm not top in that's sort of a stressful way of looking at someone's artistry. Um, I was talking about artistry out um, on X, and someone put a couple of gag and throw up emoticons
Yeah.
around it, right? And um, by being an imperfectionist, I can be like, I didn't write it for him. I wrote it.
Right.
Artistry is a concept that really works for me. It's not going to work for everyone. Just like imperfectionism, it may just be way too enmeshed with the idea of not caring about what you
Hmm.
do. But for me, it's like, oh, I am a savvy imperfectionist. I know where that there's going to be imperfections because my brain is always looking at it like my perfectionism comes from a gift of being able to perceive um, any anything and see it better. It and they manipulated that gift of perception. Like, oh, um, I could look at everything that I've said and come up with a cleaner, clearer, simpler, more emotionally engaged way to have spent our time together. I'm capable of doing that. Imperfectionism says, yeah, I love that about myself, and I am I'm a savvy imperfectionist. I relax into um, being useful. I relax into being more curious and dynamic and responsive than being um, rigid. Nature is dynamic. The weather changes. It's changed in the last 20 minutes. Um, my emotional life, your back, my back, how clear we feel, how deep we are. Those are dynamic, changing things. And uh, so concepts can serve for a healing process, a transformational process. Sometimes they stay with us. I believe that useful. Uh, I tell people I love to be useful. Um, that's a good look for me. It
Yeah,
it is it is a
it's it's literally how I start every single one of my client sessions. I ask the question, "How can I be useful today?" And just
yeah.
kinda showing up in that way. The other word I wanna grab onto that you're using in there that I think is, again, a softening process for us is I love the word silly, because silly, like, we're evaluating something without judging something. One of the things that Gary Craig talked about a lot in the early trainings was the comedies of our minds. And when we drug this thought from our subconscious mind out into the light of day, how silly. And for me, the word farce always made sense. It's like, can you really believe I believe this thing at my core? Because when I shine light on it, it's like, oh my gosh, how silly is that particular thing? And silly, I think of I don't know if you are a Harry Potter person, but in Harry Potter there's this thing that's called a boggart, and what it does is it turns into your deepest darkest fear. And the way that you defeat it is you make it farcical. So if it's like a giant spider, all of a sudden you see the giant spider on roller skates and it's stumbling all over the place. Or if it's someone who you are afraid of, you see them in your grandma's nightgown. And by
Exactly.
making it silly, it's just taking the sting out of it so we can evaluate it for what it is. And what it does is, like, when I'm looking at a choice I've made in the past and I'm like, boy, wasn't that silly? I respond to that so differently than, boy, wasn't that dumb? Like, just my emotional
Or a
engagement with my,
failure, or
yes,
um,
absolutely.
yeah, and it adds a context. Just like I was raised to be smart,
Hmm.
how society thought
Yep.
smart, and I have some gifts in that area. But because I can perceive things, like I don't really memorize. Um, it's not a
Hmm.
gift that I have. And a lot of like going to med school was blocked for me because, which I'm
Right.
glad, because in the early ages you have to memorize a lot of things and had to be able to recall. So is that smart or not? Um, Finding the concept of savvy says, hey, savvy is practical. It's useful. Like, how could I be useful? It's a sort of a useful intelligence that's grounded in wisdom. It's
I just keep
grounded,
hearing street smart in my head.
yeah, which I I want my I think by modeling savvy,
Hmm.
um, when I talk to my kids, um, I'll ask my 10-year-old, "Hey, does that feel savvy? Or
Hmm.
is there some other thing that feels more savvy that you could adapt to?" Um, I notice if it's like, well, that wasn't smart. That's judgmental.
Right.
It's not evolutionary. It's not saying, I want to be more savvy. Savvy with money is different. Like I want to be smart with money puts a pressure
Yeah.
on me. It's like, I want to be savvy with the
Yeah.
energy of money. Okay. So this is where concepts like, even though they taught me I was stupid with money, I I'm open to being a bit more savvy. You're using a concept and an energy um, to move your energy towards something that is true to your nature. I assume that people that tap want to be healing, of course, releasing trauma, and we also want to be thriving. We want to be emotionally free. We want to make choices that are right for us, um, and even shift from attitudes that are like our default to something else. And this is where the clarity that says, yes, this is a concept that is structural for me. This is part of my framework. Out of all the wise concepts that are out there that I could choose from, um, this one, useful. Yeah, useful feels good. Um, uh, and right distance, right depth. Oh, well, that changes things, right? It gets me asking questions about closeness, depth, right? We do that with a fire. We can do that with the fire of passion. We can do that with relationships at work, um, and I believe that.
So yeah. So
Uh,
just yeah.
Go ahead.
No, finish your sentence. Then I have a tapping request for you.
Sure. Um, there's a concept of stewardship that matters a lot to me, and it has provided great relief for a lot of the pressures. So, like, if I'm building a business, there's a whole energetic field of what it means to be a success, what it means to do it right. If I'm building a family, if if I if I go by the default on what it means to be a success, that's very different from an attitude, a framework of stewardship. Stewardship says, like my business serves me, it serves my family, and it serves my circle and community. What you're doing and the people that are involved in this program, to me, we're stewarding connection. We're stewarding um, exposure to other people's wisdom. Uh, we're creating engagement that is for the long term. Stewardship to me says it extends to the future me of next week, next decade, generations to come. And when we get back to that concept of stewardship, we're really saying we are blessed with resources, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, and we're tending to them for not just our survival. Yeah, survival is a part of it, but stewardship adds this whole, like, if you are abundant, if you are given and blessed with flow that is beyond what you need for your immediate survival, how do you steward your energy, your choices to to truly be thriving both in your me space as well as your we space? And that's what we're doing by giving our attention to
Yeah.
things like concepts and usefulness and emotional thriving.
Awesome. Well, Rick, I you are one of my favorite people to talk with because we're in a circumstance where there is enough of our disposition that are similar that it's really easy to be on the same page. And the way you think about healing and transformation and how we show up in the world just continues to stretch and pull me at all sorts of edges. And I
Me
really
too.
appreciate the fact that you consistently are working from this heart-centered space to like embody all of the concepts that you have just been talking about. And so I just want to thank you for sharing your time, but more importantly, just sharing your experience and your wisdom. It just means the world to me. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you, Gene.
If you found this interview inspiring, I would encourage you to support the Peaceful Heart Network by going to 24hoursoftapping.com/support or clicking the link in the description. And you will see on the screen right now a playlist to all of the interviews from this year's and last year's 24 Hours of Tapping. I hope you enjoyed those as well.